Birmingham Research Institute for History and Cultures. We're based at the University of Birmingham in the School of History and Cultures, so you can see the connection. We're there to really promote and encourage interdisciplinary and intersector conversations and to champion the value of humanities research and scholarship both in academia but also beyond. So I hope you have a great evening, and over to John, who's going to be chairing the event. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, I'll stand over here. I'll stand at a distance and take off my mask. Okay, well, hi everybody. Good evening. My name's John Munro, and I teach in the history department at the University of Birmingham. And I remember not long after I moved to Birmingham in 2019, I read something on the BBC West Midlands news website about Janatul Bakia, a 6-year-old girl who was killed in a pedestrian crossing in Smethwick by a motorist. I was horrified at seeing this. But the weird thing was, it wasn't even really a news story. It was more like a 3-line blip in the news cycle. The driver, it seemed, faced no consequences, though that was left unclear in the news item. It said nothing about the dangerous design of the road or any other context. It was really jarring to read about such a horrific event covered in such a cursory way in the news. Around the same time as I read about Janatul Bakia, a cyclist named David Perkins was killed by another driver just around the corner from the flat where I lived in Ladywood. After this happened, no traffic filter went up, no bollards, there isn't even a pedestrian crossing there, and I can pretty much guarantee that there's cars speeding around that very corner right now. So an obvious pattern presented itself to me. In this city, pedestrians and cyclists are killed by drivers with shocking regularity. And the so-called experts, local media, road engineers, city planners, and of course the auto industry and its advertisers appear to have little interest in what systemic traffic violence has wrought. And there's so many of these stories, each often treated as though it was an isolated event. There's Hope Fennell, the 13-year-old girl killed by a texting truck driver in Kings Heath, and Carrie Lee Morris, a 2-year-old baby who was killed by a driver while being pushed along the sidewalk or pavement with his parents out for one of the very first time. The local media actually called this a pram crash. Or bus driver Ghulam Nabi, recently killed by yet another hit-and-run driver while crossing a street in Digbeth. And this list of names goes on, I think, as we all know, on and on. So at the same time as I was taking note of this awful pattern of what auto marketing expert Tom Flood calls results, not accidents, I couldn't help but notice that if you own a car in Birmingham, you're allowed to just leave this rather large piece of private property right on the sidewalk, pavement, or idle your engine right outside of a school, or more or less do what you like, safe in the knowledge that your car will never be towed, and no matter what outrage you commit behind the wheel, a judge will inevitably put you back on the road before long. For pedestrians and cyclists, meanwhile, getting from A to B can be a stressful and frightening experience. I know this from walking. I'm sure many people in this room do. I know it from walking and cycling in Birmingham with my own family. We're just trying to get to work or school or maybe a skateboard park. We didn't sign up for a rigged Squid Game in which a majority of participants are threatening us with 2-ton death machines. And I haven't even mentioned the environment, a topic I know is on all of our minds, especially given the way electric cars, those machines that do not fight climate change, are being sold to us as if they're any kind of solution to the problems COP26 is supposed to address. So, despairing at this situation and the ways that individualist automobility re-entrenches structures of power organized along lines of race, class, gender, age, and ability, what did I do? Well, over lockdown, I tweeted into the void about UK car culture and started talking to myself in YouTube videos, neither of which, you'll be shocked to learn, seem to accomplish very much. But at the same time, I soon discovered that many people here in Birmingham care deeply about how cars have come to dominate so much of our public space and are working to reimagine a Birmingham with greener, fairer transport options for everyone. And now that we can gather in person again, it brings me great pleasure to chair this panel with 5 of them, who I've invited here to share their thoughts and experiences about the crisis of car culture in Birmingham and what we might do about it. So let me introduce them in the order that they'll speak. Nathan Cardon is an associate professor of US history at the University of Birmingham. He researches the intersections of race, empire, and bicycle mobilities in the 19th and 20th centuries. He's currently working on a book entitled The World a Wheel, Americans in the First Global Bicycle Age, 1885 to 1929. And he recently published an article, an excellent article, I should add, in Technology and Culture on race, technology, and bicycle mobilities in the American South. After Nathan, we'll hear from Shivaji Shiva, who's a charities partner at the law firm VWV LLP in Brindley Place, where he advises on the creation of charities, their dissolution, and most of the issues they encounter in between. He enjoys a leisurely and immensely sociable cycle commute from Bournville to Brindley Place, and founded the employer-led campaign Cycle Works Birmingham to call for sustained investment in high-quality cycleways so those who wish to can cycle to their place of work. He's also advocating school streets and low-traffic neighborhoods for South Birmingham, together with other members of the resident-led group, Our Bournville. Next, we'll hear from Ridhi Kalaria, who is the West Midlands Partnerships Manager for Sustrans, an alumni of the University of Birmingham. She's an advocate and advisor in the field of healthy and environmentally sustaining placemaking. She seeks to harness the potential of our streets, spaces, and communities to support physical and mental health and equity. After that, we'll hear from Zoya Ahmed, who is part of Civic Square, who are interested in social and civic infrastructure and reimagining economic possibilities for the 21st century. She's part of the Neighborhood Donut team, exploring how donut economics, a concept coined by Oxford economist Kate Raworth, could be used as a compass to meet the needs of all people, while respecting and operating within ecological boundaries on a neighborhood scale. Although, as she says, she only learned to cycle in 2019, she wholeheartedly believes cycling is one of the best things she's ever learned, that it's transformed her life for the better, and she dreams for cycling to feel safer and more accessible in Birmingham. And finally, we'll hear from Liz Clements, Labour Councillor for Bournville and Cotteridge, and she gets around her ward on a 3-speed town bike. She chairs Birmingham City Council's Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the YMCA's Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee. She's speaking tonight on this panel in a personal capacity.
YMCA probably would be more exciting.
Did I get that wrong?
It's the West Midlands Combined Authority, not the YMCA. Sorry,
Oh,
John.
well. My apologies.
Sorry, John.
So I've asked each of our panelists to speak for 10 minutes each, after which we'll open up the discussion with the audience. So please help me welcome our speakers. Over to you, Nathan.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, John, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming and the panel. Let me just start this up here. I guess I should preface this talk slightly by saying that I'm not actually a historian of Birmingham, nor am I really a historian of Great Britain, nor am I really a cycling historian. But I do, John, I think I need your password.
Oh, sorry.
But I do actually write about the bicycle in the context of an expanding United States at the turn of the last century. So I guess that's why I'm here. But I think just like all of you, I consider myself a cyclist, a pedestrian, and I'm concerned about the ways in which automobility has really shaped this city and really structured my life in an everyday kind of way. And so because of that, I've really just dipped my toes into the archives here in Birmingham. But I would recognize, and I would assume that some of you are probably more experts on Birmingham cycling history than I am. Great. So because of that, I've also been reliant on a few other British historians, Peter Cox, Carlton Reid, and Simon Gunn. So a lot of their work feeds into this talk. So I'd like to start this talk with a photograph taken just around the corner from my house, actually, on Bournville Lane in 1905. It was making the rounds on Twitter earlier this year when the Bournville Society posted it, and it shows Cadbury workers cycling to work, going about their business, going to work on their bicycles. I see Sandra, she also lives on the same street as me. We can tell you that Bourneville Lane does not look like that today at the rush hour. But from this image, I'd like to make sorry, I'm gonna move around, can't help it. From this image, I'm gonna make 3 points. Before Birmingham was a motor city, it was a cycling city. The second point I wanna make is that the shift to automobility was not natural or inevitable. This just didn't just happen. It was made through a series of choices at a variety of levels. And that the cycling city still exists, including some of its infrastructure, and it remains to this day. It just happens to be buried under asphalt and parked cars, as is often the case. So a brief history of cycling and the kind of rise of automobility. So compared to the United States, which embraced automobility well before the car was a viable technology, mass automobility came much later to the UK. Indeed, it wasn't taken until the 1980s for the UK to have the same per car capita as the United States did in the 1950s. So the shift to automobility came later here than most other English-speaking nations, and was driven, at least not initially, by this kind of groundswell mass interest in automobility, largely also because the car was very unaffordable. But so as both Peter Cox and Carlton Reid have shown, Britain was building separate cycleways right through the 1930s, including here in Birmingham. So there's a cycleway built in the 1930s on the Chester Road in North Birmingham. Shenley Road in Bourneville has a separate cycleway. And I'm pretty sure that Cartland Road connecting Sturchley to King's Heath also has a separate cycleway. These are now parking lots if you ever go to these places. So before this shift to automobility, Birmingham was a cycling city. So just to say what the safety bicycle is and how it changed things, it was invented just down the road in Coventry in 1885. The modern safety bicycle has wheels of equal size, diamond frame. During this period of the 1890s, Britain produced millions of bicycles. Millions of bicycles were bought and sold. And as the cost of bicycles rapidly declined around 1896, it went from being a high-tech luxury good associated with athletic men to a democratic technology embraced by women, members of the urban working class, and agricultural workers. Historians and geographers have made clear the ways that the bicycle changed the ways Britons, Americans, and others thought of their cities, their landscapes, and each other. At the center of this kind of global bicycle age that emerges at the end of the 19th century is Birmingham. Birmingham is at the center of the global bicycle age. I mean, it really is the center. The West Midlands and Birmingham is the center of the global bicycle age, really to the Second World War. Cyclists could be found in their thousands across the region. In 1895 in Tamworth, 4,255 cyclists passed through the city on the August bank holiday Monday. With bicycles recognized in 1894 Local Government Act as conveyances, municipalities moved to regulate them. Regulation was really important because it legitimated cyclists' right to the road, even as local newspapers filled with cyclists breaking these new laws. Cyclists were also responsible for helping to modernize Birmingham roads. So in 1911, the Birmingham Mail published on the need to improve the paving from Gravelly Hill to Corporation Street, stating that the granite and wood paving along that stretch, including in the suburbs, other places in the suburbs, quote, restricted cycling. They needed to pave these roads to encourage more cycling. Of course, 60 years later, Gravelly Hill will be the site of the Spaghetti Junction interchange. The author believed that it would be, quote, to the general welfare to encourage the use of bicycles and similar vehicles in every reasonable way. Any improvement in streets or roads which quickens and cheapens the movement of people and goods from place to place is a great advantage for the community. And he also concluded that Brummies would save money on tax because cyclists have less wear and tear on the roads because the number of horse fans are reduced. It's almost as if he's describing my cycle up the Pershore Road. Bicycles quickly became part of the fabric of urban life in Birmingham. Industry, however, drove the bicycle boom, and the boom drove industry. Throughout the 1890s and into the first decades of the 20th century, Rover and Triumph in Coventry, Raleigh in Nottingham, and BSA and Hercules in Birmingham expanded rapidly. Hundreds of other small producers sprung up only to go bust or swallowed up by these bigger firms. As late as 1927, Hercules Cycles directly or indirectly employed 25,000 people, producing 30,000 bicycles a week in its 11-acre factory in Aston. Aston Villa's mascot, Hercules the Lion, takes his name from the Hercules factory across the road. Villa Park and Wolverhampton Wolves Stadium, Molineux, started off as shared venues with cycle tracks or velodromes. In the end, shifts in technology, policy, and culture meant that Birmingham's cycling history has all been but erased. Following the war with the city centre heavily damaged, Birmingham City Council's chief engineer, Herbert Manzioni, set out to design the city for an automobile future. He had hoped to start it in the mid-1930s, but the war got in the way. By 1971, the Inner Ring Road, the UK's first urban motorway, and Spaghetti Junction had made Birmingham the very first British motor city, based on the personal and municipal status of the car. As much as 1/5 of the population was employed in some element of automobile production in the 1960s. At the moment of its creation, though, as a motor city in the 1970s, Brummies resisted the logic of the car, and as Simon Gunn has noted, the ideal of the motor city collapsed. This collapse was brought on by a number of activists and actors in a variety of fields, from planners to academics to concerned citizens, that realized the environmental, urban, and social costs that such motor city planning created. For instance, in the 1970s, the residents of Kings Heath and Moseley banded together to stop a bypass that would go right through their suburban neighborhood, destroying 324 homes and connecting the Inner Ring Road to the Middle Ring Road. In the 1970s, Moseley and Kings Heath citizens rallied to stop their neighborhoods from being taken over by the logic of the car, retaining the pedestrian character of their suburbs. Automobility became less of an issue as the 1970s moved through the 1980s, and you have deindustrialization and the urban crises. However, economic growth since the mid-1990s has meant that the number of cars on British roads has increased at more than twice the rate of the population growth. By 2020, there were 35 million registered cars, or roughly one car for every 2 people in the UK. That's just not drivers, that's everyone. Just as in the 1970s then, when Brummies rallied to stop the logic of automobility, so too I think are we at a critical juncture when we need to decide who or what the city's roads and infrastructures are for. Well, there have been recent attempts to make the city friendlier to cyclists, including a cycle revolution with new routes and promotion. One only needs to spend a few minutes on a bicycle in Birmingham to realize that this city is not for them. It's not surprising then that in 2016, only 4.3% of Brummies cycled 3 times a week, and that the West Midlands has the lowest rate of cycling in the UK. Automobility, however, has been one of the 20th century's great failures, great failed experiments. With the most congested roads outside of London, some of Europe's worst air quality, above national average obesity rates, we are paying a heavy price for our reliance on the car. However, by looking at the past, we can see that Birmingham's real cycle revolution is often buried under the asphalt of this city, and the city once again has an opportunity to be the UK's cycling city and no longer its motor city. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, those are a fantastic introduction and kind of survey of the history. I'm going to bring you right back down to earth and just ramble a little bit about my day-to-day experience. I'm Shivaji Shiva. As you've heard, I'm a local lawyer, a charity lawyer, just over the road at Brindley Place. So frankly, the bike was a little bit unnecessary, a bit more for show than because we needed it to get over here. But yeah, I'm also obviously a Birmingham resident, and by the sounds of it, not far from you, Nathan, in the south of the city. And I suspect I'm here for three main reasons, which I'll come on to. But I should probably explain the picture there first. Because I started this thinking about today by trying to work out whether I understood what car culture is. And I certainly couldn't explain it, except by saying that I know it when I see it. And at the Birmingham COP rally, I think I saw it. Because there we were, hundreds of people protesting about the need for faster action on the environment. Many of us there on bikes and explicitly concerned about motor traffic. And you know, lots of banners, lots of people. We went to go across the road on green for us, and what do we find? You've got hundreds of people channeling round one person in a car. And I don't know about you, but that's how it often feels to me as I go around my daily business in Birmingham, whether that's as a dad or as a charity lawyer. But before we get onto that, again, I did try to do some research before today. I thought, I don't know, so I'll ask other people. And I got hundreds of answers, of which I've got to say, one of the most appealing was a more favourable one. You know, one of the few people who said, I'll stand up for car culture, and just said, car culture is Jack Kerouac. So I don't know what to make of that. Most of them, though, were less favourable. And there were just a few, a very small sample of the responses that we got. So the vilification and dehumanisation of everyone outside of the car, toxic, pervasive, and one of the single biggest obstacles to solving the climate crisis. I don't think you can argue with that. But also toxic came up again and again and again. And I mention that partly because I think there is a wider feeling that something needs to change than those of us who campaign on transport sometimes believe. It's easy to feel that it's only the little bubbles that care about this. And I don't think that's true. And I also wanted to just make sure I highlighted the last example on that slide, going to be a thing of the past. I'd like to believe that's true, and people better qualified than me seem to. So Carlton, I think it was yesterday, was Carlton Reid, who many of you will know, was making the case at the Move Mobility Conference that automobiles are on their way out, and that maybe we shouldn't be focusing quite so hard on electric cars and thinking about a wider range of possible options. But I said I'd explain why I think I'm here, and I think there are three reasons. One of those is that I'm just a dad, a bit like Tom Flood, fantastic campaigner. If you don't follow him on Twitter, please do. I think he's got a brilliant way of reimagining and presenting all the things that are wrong with automobile culture and all the joys of the alternatives. If only the sight of his kids on bikes having a brilliant time. And just a dad, I've got two kids, and I arrived in Birmingham, and my wife had chosen the house this time. I've made various mistakes in the past. So she made sure that we were just across the park from primary school. So to get my kids, then both under 5, just over 5, to school, only involved a stroll of sort of 100 yards across the park, and then 800 yards along a couple of roads in leafy Bourneville. So how hard could it be? All I can tell you is that on the days that I got that job, not nearly often enough, but a couple of times a week, I came back really, really agitated every single time. Because in that short stretch, I'd see cars all over the pavement. There'd be a dozen people doing 3-point turns, while small children were being ferried across the road. And there'd be people parked all over the pavement. And what was worst about that? These were the people I knew. These were the parents of the other kids at the same school. So in the 10 minutes, the 5 minutes of the most dangerous part of my daily commute into work, which was just getting up and over the hill past this school, and then on into Birmingham, I would normally feel at least twice that I was about to die, and that someone was going to have a very difficult conversation with my wife, because they'd have to say, lovely to see you at school, and I'm really sorry about squashing your husband. You know, and you laugh, but I mean, on that little 30-40 second stretch, I have been cycling along, done that thing that those of you who cycle will know, where you think that car's really not going in a straight line. I think they might be on a phone, and gone slowly and very cautiously up beside the driver's window, only to discover that she was not on the phone. She wasn't. What she was doing was eating her breakfast out of a porcelain bowl. I still remember, it was very nice actually, a grey bowl, with a spoon, while driving past a primary school, and some children still going in. And again, I said I can't describe car culture, but I know it when I see it. I think that sort of thing is a good illustration. So I think I'm here partly because my involvement in campaigning comes from that day-to-day experience. And I want to tell you about what we decided to do about it. And that's a group of us, a range of other people who had very similar experiences, including Sandra, who's there at the back. He said, well, we've got to do something about getting around Bournemouth. It shouldn't be this hard to get our kids to school. It shouldn't be this hard to walk up and down our local streets, the neighbouring streets, to get to the local shops that are only 5 minutes away. And I say again, in leafy Bourneville. And I'm not bragging. What I'm saying is, if we can't do it there, in an area that is very lucky, and thanks to George Cadbury and those that have maintained his legacy, has a lot of beautiful green space, why, you know, how can you expect people who live close to the city centre, who live in areas with more densely packed housing, and who often have, who may live in areas where there's less time because people are working harder, less financially able, you know, less able to get out there and fight for their space, how are they going to get to school, get to work safely? So what we decided to do was to bring ourselves together and to start campaigning for a low traffic neighbourhood. This was before the announcements in Birmingham. A number of us had heard about the concept and thought it would be a great idea. And we were delighted to find that our neighbours agreed. And we did a survey of the local area and got a lot of responses a bit like this one, which again was about trying to escape the impact of cars on the local area. And about the sense, as you can tell, that quote came from later on when we'd seen a little bit of lockdown, the sense that as we came out of lockdown, we'd be losing the benefits that had been gained. And I think we know that we have, really. Don't have time to talk to you about what we really want in the form of a low traffic neighbourhood in Bourneville. I'm very happy to tell you, and I have bored Liz at length with what I'd like to see as our local council, one of our local councillors. But that image from Naomi Fisher, who's a local socially conscious architect, captured very early on the fact that simply by blocking some roads to passing motor traffic, we could really transform the experience for local people. And I just want to highlight a couple of things about our Bourneville and by extension the other local groups all across the city pushing for low traffic neighbourhoods. And in particular the fact that actually there's an assumption that some parts of the community won't be in favour of them, and it's not always true. So you hear a lot about business opposition to low traffic neighbourhoods. You go and talk to them, and particularly if you go to talk to them as a customer, you find that's not always the case. And as you can see from the quote up there, Rossiter's butchers in Bourneville are very keen on maintaining their customer base of people who walk and cycle to the store. I mention that partly because there are butchers in West London and Kings Heath, amongst other places, that have come out less favourably about cycle measures. And I guess what we found was that we had a surprising degree of support in the area. There's a lot of confusion and concern about low traffic neighbourhoods and what they might bring. But fundamentally what we're looking for, and it's a little bit unfair with Liz sat under that picture, but is political will. And
this is your representative choice.
no, and this is an example of what's not great about the political will in the city, because we've got some great councillors, and I'm very happy to put Liz in that category of people who really get it about transport and who regularly push for what they want. But one of the things John asked us to talk about today was the sort of change that we want, and I think one of the things has to be that people of the sort that are in this room, and also the sort that aren't and wouldn't be very interested in this conversation, begin to say, I am, however, concerned to get my kids to school safely in the morning, I would like to think about getting to work in a way that means I don't have to get in that crowded train with that slightly uncomfortable feeling that maybe I'm a bit closer to people who might have a persistent cough than I really want to be. And actually I live 5 miles from the city centre and I used to cycle 20 years ago. I might be willing to do it, you know. So there needs to be a process of challenging, as well as supporting those councillors, those politicians who get it, like Liz, and saying thank you. I'm very happy to do that, Liz, and say thank you for all that you do in Bourneville. I think there's a process of challenging people like Khalid Mahmood and saying, actually, you don't get it, and you're talking nonsense, and that needs to be said again and again. And then there's just another quote, which I think is worth, thank you, just saying that we need more ambition, we need to push for more. And then in terms of things that we can do, the other thing is, as well as being just a dad, I'm a charity lawyer, I work in one of the city businesses, and one of the things we've done is pull together a campaign, of an employer-led campaign of businesses and employers who feel that we should make it easier for those people who want to commute in by bike. It's fairly self-explanatory, cycling works, you can find it on the web, and it would be great if any of you whose employers aren't already supporting it went away and asked them to do so. I've got to say, the university is already a supporter. And finally, just as I close, the other thing that is worth doing is reminding us that there's some good things about cycling, and here's another person who does a great job of showing the joy of cycling, but I actually only included her picture because she's got a great smile. You got that picture at the back?
I'll send it to her.
Great.
So she knows to say.
And if I was to sum up with what I'd like people to do and actions, I'd like you to think about joining Cycling Works Birmingham, or rather asking your employer to do so. I'd like to think about joining or forming a local group. And it's, if you're in one already, think about linking to the next one, because there's something about combined action. I'd like you to support politicians who get it, challenge those who don't, and above all, share the joy of walking, cycling, or doing anything except taking the easy option and getting into that car on the driveway. Thank you, and sorry to overrun, John.
I'm going to be that person. Can I plug mine in?
Of course, yeah.
Will it work? That person who didn't send it to you in time.
No, it's fine.
There's always one.
I think it's just a matter of this cord. I think we're done with that anyways. Yeah.
As if by magic it will work. As if by magic it will work. I'm going to turn this around. Oh, like this, so you can see me. I'm going to take this off. Hi, thanks for having me, and thanks. I think I'm following on quite nicely from what you have all said. I think most of you are probably aware of who Sustrans are, but I will give you the 30-second elevator pitch, I suppose, lift pitch. We're the UK charity making it easier for people to walk and cycle. And we have 2 strategic priorities, so the 2 things that we focus all of our work under. Paths for Everyone, which is a UK-wide network of traffic-free paths. So you might have seen that as the National Cycle Network, the NCNs, with the blue signs with the little red numbers that take you from place to place. And we want them to be connecting all of our cities and towns and places. And we want them to be safe for everyone to be able to use, including people using different types of mobility vehicles, double pushchairs, mobility scooters, trikes, bikes, cargo bikes. And then the second priority is livable cities and towns for everyone. So places that connect us to each other, what we need, and where everyone can thrive without having to use a car. So that is in our motto, it's in our strategic priority, that not needing a car. We're not anti-car, you can still use them, that's okay, but let's not need it all the time. So I wanted to start with something a little bit controversial, but that's why we're here, I suppose. I think that many people think that owning and driving a car is a right that they are entitled to, but it's not. It's actually a bit of a privilege to own and drive a car. A heavy load, children, distance, these are all reasons why we use cars. It's the reasons why I use my car. But it is still a privilege and something that I'm working on not taking for granted, and something that I want to talk a bit about today. A little bit around car ownership, a little bit around what we think car ownership looks like and what it actually looks like, and a bit of context about Birmingham. And it also feels like a lot of conversations around the low traffic neighbourhoods, for example, are from people, a lot of the angry conversations, that should I say, are from people that are annoyed that their car journey is going to take longer, or has changed, or is less simple or easy or direct. And as if they think that the car has got more right to that stretch of road than the pedestrian or the cyclist or the people having a nice time standing outside their properties having a cup of tea because they now can. It feels like there's this sort of, feeling that they deserve it more. Some stats here, I won't read through them, and I can share these with you, but just thinking about that third one down, 60%, this is from the DFT, 60% of journeys, even distances of 1 to 2 miles, were made by car. We do it because it's automatic, like Shivaji said, it's there, it's on the driveway, it's easy, we have the infrastructure for it. We know that we've got a road that will get us there that's not half finished, ends with a cycle end lane here, or a barrier somewhere. We know that Google Maps will take us there. And why do we drive? These are some of the reasons that we drive, but it's also because, look at it, it's very appealing. They make it look very sexy. They make it look like this beautiful secret space that's yours. You can listen to your own music, you can set your own temperature, you don't have to listen to other people chatting about whatever they're chatting about on their phone. You can set the timings for your journey, you can get in at your doorstep and get out at your destination, you don't have to walk in the rain. All these reasons, you have so much control over it, and that's what they're selling you. They're selling you that element of control. But we have to, as people that know that things need to change, decide to make a small sacrifice. Sacrifice that short journey in the rain to the bus stop to get your journey a bit long, to make your journey a little bit longer. But actually, it's a small sacrifice for you, but thinking about it in that bigger context, it's not really a very big thing. And I know it's not perfect, that we can't, and not something that we can do every time, but if we can think about it sometimes. And then another point to make here, why we drive, is about safety. I attended today a round table around violence against women and girls in the transport sector. So thinking about that personal safety as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, as an independent person, not boxed in their little vehicle. It's something that we do need to consider if we're ever going to change the way we move around. We need to think about that. This is an image courtesy of Nissan, the Nissan Juke, which is a very popular car in the UK. So another reason, why do we drive? Because this is the alternative. This parent, child and pushchair in and amongst all these cars, this taxi letting somebody out, and then on the right hand side an image of this car and this toddler in front of it. From this angle, this driver cannot see this child. They have no clue that this person exists there. So this is the age-old argument that people make. I don't walk my kids to school because there's too much traffic and it's too dangerous, and I don't want to have that risk of them being hit by a car that's bigger than them, that they can't even see over the bonnet of. But obviously we're here aware that continues to create that car culture. The average car today is 28% bigger than it was in 1965. More cars, bigger cars, more space given over to these vehicles, and cars apparently are parked 95% of the time, so we're only using them 5% of the time that we have them. Our streets aren't big enough for that, and they weren't built for that. A little bit more around car ownership. So again, from the Department for Transport, car ownership has gone up. 4 in 5 households have a car, but according to data from the Office of National Statistics from 2018, 35% of those in the lowest 10% of earners own one or more car, compared to 93% of those in the highest 10% own one or more car. So then we can point to, and this is quite simplified extrapolations from this data. I'm not a scientist, so bear with me on that one. But we can point to poverty and access as a divide in the car ownership conversation. And then this extends to how those are inextricably linked to racial inequality, inequality around gender, and inequality around disabled people. And this extends to thinking about who feels like they have a right to drive based on that ownership. And I sort of made another comment, and not scientific extrapolation, just my experiences. And then taking this to a sort of more localised context. So this is from, I can again share this link, it's from a website where car registration data was uploaded. So looking at Birmingham, the dotted blue line is the national average, and then Birmingham is above it. And the first graph, it's not a road, you can see it much bigger there. This is the total change, the cars per capita owned, and then the second graph on the right is the number of cars registered. So over time you can see that Birmingham, again the red line, and the national average, the blue line, how many cars we own in comparison to other parts of the UK. And then again, this website, I won't dwell on that too long, but the website also shows you where that car ownership sits within the city. So again, if you want to drill down into that data, you can. And the darker the purple, the higher the growth of car ownership. But Birmingham, we have a very diverse population. 47% not white British, 38% aged 24 or under. So we do have some younger drivers. And young people, 17 to 29, are now making fewer trips by car compared to 92, 94, and have less of them have driving licenses. And so we have, for want of a better way of putting it, a captive audience, a new generation of people, the next generation of people who don't want the car to be king in our city, or I think this data is national, so across the nation. So we have an opportunity to change things, but we have to be bold and we have to be willing. Okay, so I want to sort of change the conversation a little bit. And I brought the book with me. I was actually sorry to reach over you. Going to read you a quote from it. To change this, just a little step change, we also have to stop thinking about cars as the enemy themselves. We create the divide of the cars, the people as the drivers, and it's not the cars themselves. And this is something that I would like to look into a bit more, that I'm talking to Sandra about at the back, what the culture of a car actually is. And this is something that you started this conversation on. And cars in certain cultures aren't this solely a mode of transport. They're a private space, they're a space to be alone, they're a space in a multi-generational household that's yours, they are a space that is an extension of your personality, or something that you create that's a creative output as well. And I wanted to read you this one sort of quote from this book called Race, Taste, Class and Cars. I know this makes me sound like a nutter. I bet that's what you're thinking. I'm a nutcase. When I'm driving, I'll be listening to the radio, and if a song comes on and I know it, I'll sing along. I'd never do that anywhere else, not even at home. And when one of my cousins died, I couldn't cry in public. I just couldn't. And as soon as I got in my car, I was in pieces. That car was my safe space. So I just wanted to add this in here because sometimes we think of this car as the enemy, and it's not. It's this automation of us getting into it and using it all the time, the infrastructure that we've created to get around in it, and sort of a moment to think about changing the narrative a little bit and thinking about what we as individuals can do, but also what we can do to lobby. I think I've lost my train of thought there. Anyway, when we have to start thinking about differently, make small changes. We also need major planning and infrastructure overhaul. Like Nathan said, it exists there under the asphalt. We need to bring it back. We need to be bold and have bold ambitions. This one's on policymakers and decision makers, but it's on us too. And that's that small sacrifice for the greater good. In some cases, it's as stark as your 10 minutes extra on the bus or on a bike, but that makes a big difference to who's on the road. And that's me. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So, I told John when he asked me to do this, I was like, hold on a second, I'm no bike expert. I really felt quite distanced from cycling. And then John sort of held a mirror up to that situation of but your story or your experience of cycling in this city, or why you didn't cycle in this city, is also valid. So when thinking about this conversation, I was thinking of it from two spheres. One being the personal sphere of, you know, what it was like, you know, being born in Small Heath, growing up in Moseley, to migrants from Pakistan, in a really large like family, what it's like being a woman in a house of three brothers. You know, how was I going out? What's my mobility like? And then and that whole journey from a personal perspective, and then also speaking a little bit to Civic Square's work and the ideas of donor economics, which it's been really inspiring to hear all the conversation that's come before, because it's painted such an overall, or like an overarching, like four-dimensional landscape of, you know, the situation today, from the historical context to the cultural context to, you know, we just want safety for our children, and it really made me think of learning about how Sigmund Freud's theories of psychoanalysis were used to grow market culture, consumer culture after the Second World War, and, you know, what are the sort of values of narcissism, ego, and how cars were, like, you know, intentionally sexualized around that time to sort of speak to, you know, what we now like, you know, lower sort of desires, and that whole psyche, which has been perpetuated in quite a militant way since after the Second World War. And it's really interesting to learn that the Spaghetti Junction was built after the Second World War, and to think about those sort of things, you know, those sorts of shifts happening at similar times. And I'm completely riffing here, I'm just going with the flow. But I remember, so I learned how to cycle when I lived in Leipzig. I did my year abroad there, and everyone cycles, right? Like that's East Germany, like that was, you know, the communist part, like Russia, like was the political power there after the war, and France, Britain, and USA, they were like the Western forces that are in Western Germany. So the culture in East Germany is really particular, unique. There's very much so like a DIY spirit of, like, if we need something, we build it ourselves. These spaces, we reclaim them ourselves. Even the idea of reunification came from Leipzig, from East Germany. So there's very like people-led culture there. And my friend was like, "What? You don't know how to ride a bike? Like, what have you been doing?" And I was just like, "Oh, like, I'm from Birmingham, like, it's not very bike friendly." And then, you know, like, and then coming to this conversation today and realizing, like, oh wait, like, it's actually not bike friendly, and that's why, like, I haven't been cycling. And, you know, like, I wasn't seeing like Muslim, Pakistani, South Asian women in Small Heath. I wasn't seeing my aunties on a bike. Do you know what I mean? Like, my parents still think, you know, what are you cycling for? Like, you need a car. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want a car. Like, I'm really happy on my bike. Like, you don't understand the joy that I feel when I'm on a bike. And yeah, there's so many different levels to this. You know, I also was thinking about, you know, migrants and like the ideals of like formerly colonized people who come to this like heartbeat center of like colonization, particularly in terms of like Birmingham as like a center of the Industrial Revolution. And, you know, what were the ideals that people were chasing? What was, you know, what was the status? What was the symbol of safety? What was the symbol of, you know, getting about your life? And, you know, for many people, my parents included, and still to this day, it was like wearing a suit, driving a car, and I can't blame them, because that's a safety thing and that's a generational thing. And I've seen, like, you know, groups like Saheli Hub, you know, start creating spaces for like women from these like from different migrant communities to have a safe space to explore cycling and the joys of cycling together. But yeah, when I learned how to ride a bike in Germany, like, my friend literally held the bike, and my brother, like, he also came and he was like, all you gotta do is look where you want to go. and having that experience as an older person because everyone's like, oh, you know, that's easy, it's just like riding a bike. And I'd always be like, but I can't even ride a bike. And so, you know, having that experience of learning as a grown person and falling a few times, and then just like finding that flow space, experiencing the joy of cycling through a forest, experiencing the joy when I came back to England. I didn't have to get the bus anymore, of cycling past the bus that was just stuck in traffic because there was one road at my uni in Leeds. And I was like, on my bike. And yeah, and actually before I went to Germany and I was in Leeds, my housemate, who was like middle class white girl, she had a bike and she was just telling me how great it is to cycle to uni. And I was just like, okay, like, but it didn't really like sit with me, or I didn't think like, okay, that's something I could do as well. It just felt like, oh, that's something that white people do. I guess it's just because like not having those role models, or like it just not being normalized. And even now when I'm cycling like from Portloop, from B16 to Small Heath, where my auntie lives, and I will notice, I will feel how I'm on Coventry Road, surrounded by uncles and aunties, little brown girl on the bike. And in a way I almost feel like that is building a bridge, or like I feel something in like I'm trying to, like, it's creating a shift, even though I'm just, you know, living my life and going to my auntie's house. But I feel like just being there on a bike, like, I hope makes some kind of shift. But yeah, that's like a whole like personal context. And then in thinking about the donut, which is about like meeting the needs of all people within the means of the planet, and actually like unifying what that means. And so how can our benefiting and safety and health and abundance also mean planetary health, safety, abundance? You know, we often talk about infrastructure and about how until it's there, people don't use it. But, you know, as soon as there's like, you know, a line dividing a thing, then you automatically see the infrastructure and you're just drawn to use it. But there also needs to simultaneously be a cultural shift of like, what do we value? And the question of what we value is really central to economics and like economic imagination and economic possibility. So whereas this like 20th century post-Second World War, also for many of you might already know this, Adam Curtis did a documentary on this. I wrote an essay about it, which is what actually got me into donor economics. But Woodrow Wilson's 14 points after the war, they were coined by Edward Bernays, who was Freud's nephew. And so he applied those sort of, in Freud's book, Psychoanalysis, there's many techniques of how to manipulate the minds of people, particularly in mass groups. What are the kind of things that appeal to them? And so those tools were very insidiously deployed, even within like something as, you know, friendly facing and seeming as the 14 points, through to, you know, like, you know, Bernays was literally working on many of the politics and the business ventures in the US at that time. And there was a really big trend around psychoanalysis and, you know, consumer research and what are the psychological factors that are driving people. But moving into the 21st century and like trying to create a safer and more just future, which, you know, surfaces past harms and alleviates and like creates something out of them. I think like lost my trail of thought, but like there is something about, yeah, like those tools can be used for good. Those tools can be used to create regenerative possibilities. Those tools can be used to inspire people in a cool way. Like if we showed like how sick and trendy and amazing for your health, and do you know what I mean? It's just how things are portrayed. But if we showed cycling as like an awesome thing, that's gonna catch on, and then young people, when they experience it, they'll be like, oh yeah, this is great. And I think one of the biggest concerns right now in the infrastructure piece is the safety element around that, you know, which is like a massive barrier. But as you said, like there was that infrastructure, something's been put on top of it, but we can resurface it. And I think even retelling this history and this story of Birmingham as a cycling city, sort of like reclaim some of that people power Yeah, there's so many different interesting elements to this. And so yeah, when my friend from Leipzig came to, it was in Leeds, and he was like, he was just telling me that, like, yeah man, like England used to have cycling lanes everywhere, but they valued the cars over people, so they just built parking lots everywhere. And that just painted it really black and white for me, of like, oh yeah, like the product, the thing that's being sold is more important than the people and their safety and them getting around. And I think just visibilizing that, being aware of that, is really important. And also just, yeah, I'm really inspired by, is it Shivaji?
It is.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by like how you've created this sort of local movement within, you know, your neighborhood, of like, how can we connect together to make this safer for us? How can we sort of like utilize our collective voice for something bigger than us, and something that, you know, can get passed on to future generations. So I don't know what the solutions are, right? I'm here to learn. I'm here to listen. I'm grateful for the work that everyone's doing. And I really hope that cycling in the city can become safer, because cycling is literally one of the greatest joys. So good for your health, good for the earth, you know, gets to you to where you need to be, makes you mindful of place and like your transition. It's also a place where your thoughts can flow and you have a mindful space, and you know, you're there, you're breathing, your muscles are working, you're alive. Yeah, thank you.
So, hi everybody, I'm Liz Clements, and as John and Shivaji have said, I'm a local councillor in South Birmingham in Bourneville and Cotteridge for the Labour Party. I'm actually starting to wonder whether this was a setup, because John and I met randomly in the summer on the King's Heath critical mass bike ride, which was great fun. And we had a beer, John, his wife and his kids afterwards, and we talked about our experiences. And the thing that we had in common was having spent time in Germany. As it happens, you've been in Rostock, I think that was where you've been. I spent time in Hamburg, Berlin, Frankfurt. Zoya's been in Leipzig, which is, some of you may know, is our twin city. It's a twin city of Birmingham, as is Frankfurt. And really, a lot of my things that I've become interested in as a councillor, and things that I've campaigned on, are shaped by that really formative experience of having lived in Germany. Having visited Germany since the early 80s and spent a lot of time there in my 20s, coming to Birmingham was a real culture shock, and I think that's some of the themes that I want to pull out briefly tonight. And also, I suppose I reacted slightly when Shivaji showed a picture of Khalid Mahmood. Khalid Mahmood is my comrade, but I think that you'll see that actually in the Labour Party there is quite a broad, well, it's a big party, it's a broad church, and I think in Birmingham that we are trying to pursue some bold policies. But we have a way to go. But I wouldn't like Khalid to be exhibited as as the mainstream voice of the Labour Party on these issues, because he's not. And I think if you're going to start having a political dialogue, they need to examine the spectrum of political opinions cross-party in the city. So that's just, I'm afraid I had to say that, because I think it's important to have that context.
I think one of the notable things is that there's a spectrum within.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a spectrum in the Labour Party. I mean, I'm here. A lot of people wouldn't be here, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So. But anyway, just going back to what I'd scripted for myself, for me, what is car culture? And I was thinking about it. Well, it's a lifestyle and an urban environment built around the car. And it's a culture where walking and cycling are the exception and not the norm. So you're very much a fringe person or a weirdo if you're routinely walking or cycling as your main mode of transport. And it's also, for me, car culture is characterised by very, very inferior public transport. And again, you come back to the experiences of Birmingham compared to London, or Birmingham compared to any big conurbation in Western Europe. So I think that's where I'm starting from in thinking about car culture. So I just wanted to talk about my own experience of carless life in Birmingham since 1999, because I can't drive. I never passed my driving test. So I have lived in Birmingham since 1999 without a car. And I always say I'm Brummie by choice. I'm also carless by incompetence because I never passed the driving test. But I would say now that after 20 years, I absolutely love Birmingham, the passion, the dynamism of the city, but I absolutely hate the way that it's blighted by traffic. And I think that it's taken me a long time to get on a platform where I would say that, I think, publicly, because there's always a sense that you're a southern incomer, bringing all the prejudices about Birmingham for people who drive past it on the M6 and just see the cars and the predominance of roads and everything. They don't see the fact that we've got so many parks, so many canals, such brilliant people, such great diversity. But I think we have to be honest that this is a great city, but it could be so much better with fewer cars. And I think that's got to be the starting point for the discussions, really. And for me, I really did experience culture shock coming here. I started, I fell in love with a Brummie who incidentally grew up in Birmingham on Salisbury Road in Moseley. Never learned to ride a bike because it was an extremely busy road. It's also very steep. That's another factor. But that, just never formed the habit of cycling as a child. It just wasn't part of the family culture. And when we moved here, and people would find out that we didn't have a car, as a professional couple, living in Bourneville, people would just. Well, the main reaction was just incredulity, or just incomprehension. How is it possible to live here without a car? And again, that's the contrast, with living in bits of London or in bits of Berlin or Leipzig or Rostock. That it's perfectly possible to live there without a car and not feeling disadvantaged. So where I live, I've chosen it because it's near the cross-city line. It's on bus routes. It's possible to live there and to survive. And I haven't got any children, and at the moment I don't have dependent older relatives. So I've got there are aspects of my life which are probably not typical, but but I feel like I am managing to survive there and use public transport. Increasingly I'm cycling, but there's always a sense that you are always very low down the pecking order. You always have the sense of being the lowest priority in planning and in some respects a second-class citizen. And I think but that's what we're now trying to reverse and challenge through the policies that are being pursued across the city. Pre-COVID, I was using the bus, mainly the 11 and the 45, on an almost daily basis, and that was, again, that's a challenging experience because of the congestion. It's slow. There's all sorts of aspects of ticketing and connections, which really don't work very well, particularly if you've seen what it could be like in another city. But as COVID struck, I actually got my bike out again, partly because I was nervous about going on buses and trains, and I've got back to cycling, and I've actually found that a really liberating experience. Partly because you can predict how long a journey is going to take you in a way that you cannot on the 11 or even on a train. So tonight, I'm a 50-something overweight woman. I don't cycle very fast, but I can predict how long it's going to take me based on how long it took me before. So I set off. And I got here, even though it taken me quite a while to get here, but in a time that I predicted. And again, all of those things, are really, really liberating. And I think that's the message that we need to get across to people, that biking in particular, it actually frees you up from sitting in a metal box in queues of traffic, and it allows you to reclaim parts of your life and actually, take back control, if that's not a completely tainted expression. But I do think that I grew up, in somewhere where it was easy to cycle in Essex. It was very flat. It's Chelmsford. It's got quite good cycling infrastructure, and the distances are short. So I had the habit of cycling to school and cycling for errands when I was a child, and I carried on cycling into my late 20s, and I was living in bits of Germany or when I was a student. And I think if I hadn't had that, I think I would not be cycling in Birmingham now, because I just think it's too challenging, too dangerous. And I think for people who started cycling during the pandemic, more recently, I think the experience of going onto the roads now, particularly as traffic levels are just increasing to probably more than they were pre the pandemic. I think we still are not there with safety of cycling. I've cycled here today on the A38 cycle route, which is great as far as it goes, but then you end up in the city centre, and as we've talked about in other fora, in meetings of push bikes and things, the situation in the city centre at the moment is very difficult because of the number of roadworks and things, and also some of the plans that are being put in place we're going to make it even more difficult. So there's lots of challenges there. So what is changing, and how do we make this a less depressing picture than what I've just outlined? Because think the aim tonight is to try and think about how we reverse car culture and actually give people different options. And we have got to deprioritise the car in the conurbation, in the built-up area, and that is taking on the difficult arguments about reallocating road space and reducing parking. And those things are all in the big strategic documents that the council is now pushing forward, and we've got to hold the line on them. We must focus on road safety and reducing the speed of vehicles. There's a campaign for Vision Zero, which would to have zero deaths in road traffic accidents. We need, and again, that's something that's really, really important. So we've got some bold policies: the clean air zone in Birmingham, the Birmingham Transport Plan. And for me, the key thing in those is improving public transport. So we must have mass transit. So if you think of it, a double-decker bus takes 75 cars off the road, a single-decker takes 45 cars off the road. At the moment, it's difficult because I think people are still nervous about going on buses because of the COVID concerns and the fact that there isn't a mask mandate. But at the moment, buses are the mass transport system in the city, and then they're what a lot of people rely on. And a third of households haven't got cars, so we've got to try and get people back on buses and ensure that we have a more effective bus network. So that's why I'm in favour of bus franchising, for example. And we need that modal shift and a focus on active travel as well. So we need to look at how we persuade people to transfer their short journeys from private cars into walking and cycling. So that involves promoting low traffic neighbourhoods, looking at segregated cycleways and all the measures to make walking and cycling safer and more pleasant. And I think a measure of how successful we will be is how many women and children are cycling, and how many people are actually using cycling as an everyday functional activity. And it's great to have leisure cycling, I really support that. It's a great hobby. And cycling at the weekends, on a family trip. But actually, if we want to start changing the character of Birmingham, changing the culture of Birmingham, then we need people to be using the bike to cycle to work, do their shopping, all their errands. And as Shivaji says, in Bourneville and Cotteridge, we're lucky in some ways because we've got local amenities and we've got the potential to look at developing a 15-minute neighbourhood where you can get people to think about the errands that they're doing in their daily lives, the trips that they're doing to the doctors or going to school. All of that, are short. They're all short journeys, probably of less than a couple of miles, and they can be easily done on a bike or on foot. But for that to happen, people have got to feel that it's safe, particularly to allow their children out to cycle. So, again, it's that success measure will be: do you see children and women, families, cycling for everyday purposes? And then just finally, how do we go beyond sitting in rooms like this talking to essentially the converted? Because I'm sure there's going to be a challenging discussion afterwards, but I go to a lot of meetings where people are haranguing me because they're not in favour of this sort of development. And I think we've got to help people imagine life without a car. So again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. If I tell people I've lived here for 2 decades without a car, they just don't believe it. They don't think it's possible. They don't think it's possible to go shopping or do anything which involves carrying anything. So even before you get into a discussion about cargo bikes, the idea that you might have something on your back, in a rucksack or some panniers, that's just it sort of seems to sort of be beyond some people's comprehension. So I think we need some the sort of campaigning that Sustrans does, which gives people positive role models, and the fact that people like Zoya are getting up and talking at meetings like this, I think it's really important because it shows that it's possible to make that transition to active travel, to start learning to ride a bike when you're an adult and make a difference. So we need, so at the beginning, we need that sense that it is possible to change, and that we don't have to be locked into this car culture forever. I think we need to avoid the rhetoric of cultural wars, though, and I think that we need to focus on the argument about the best tool for the job. So for me, I'm not anti-car, because per se, because I know that this region depends on its manufacturing jobs, and things like the transition to electric vehicles will be very important to preserve good quality, well-paid manufacturing jobs. But what I am definitely anti is non-essential car use in a conurbation, which people are forced into because they have no alternative. And so I think we have to start being very clear that this is about how we move about in the city. How much do we need to move about? How are we doing it? And how can we do it in a way that's safer for everybody, more sustainable and more pleasant, and which actually allows us to reinvent our city as a greener and more sustainable conurbation. And again, we have to accept some reality. So, residents' meetings that I go to, some people will say that that their car use is essential. They've got and they're physically disabled and they've got mobility issues. So we need to reassure people that we're not stopping. It's not punitive. We're not going to stop people using their cars, but we want them to think twice about their journeys. And also what we need to reinforce is the basic point that if you absolutely need to use your car, the fact that overall there will be fewer cars on the road will make it a better experience for you as a driver. And for most of us, people who cycle are also motorists. So we're not. And I think we need to move away, from a sort of confrontation and a sort of toxic cultural war things, because there's enough of that. We've all seen what happened after the Brexit referendum, and I think just that tone of debate and that lowest common denominator argument will really drag this into the mire rather than actually moving forward in a positive way. So I know that sounds a bit Pollyannish, but I do think it's really important, because otherwise we're going to get into some of the episodes like we've seen in King's Heath in Moseley, where it has actually turned quite nasty, and some of the people, particularly some of the local councillors who've been championing it, have been subject to some quite disgusting and misogynistic abuse. And I think we've got to move away from that. We need to look at that. We need to tease out some of some of the contradictions in that sometimes, but mainly we need to embolden our leaders to carry on leading on these issues and actually setting out a vision for a sustainable and greener and more pleasant Birmingham, which is not blighted by a car culture.